Creating ivy can always be a tricky prospect in 3ds Max, and for a long time we've relied on free or inexpensive procedural ivy plugins to help automate this task for us. But if you've found, as I have, that recently these plugins have been harder to come across, or maybe if you just want to create ivy with a bit more creative control, then this tutorial might help. It demonstrates how to use a couple of macros in RailClone that can be applied to a spline to create ivy geometry. Of course, you still have to create the spline, but as you'll see, it's pretty easy. At present, the macros we'll use are only available in the downloads for this tutorial, and you'll find a link in the description. But if people find them handy, we might soon add them to the built-in library. There's also a finished version of this style in the file, so if you just want to go ahead and use it as is, then please feel free. The macro expects two types of geometry, a stem and some leaves. The stem has enough edge loops to deform around the spline, but otherwise it's just a tapered cylinder. The leaves have the pivot moved to the end of the stem. I've got a second set of leaves too. They're basically exactly the same, but I've bent the stems underneath and realigned the pivots. We'll create a sequence between these two groups to create a pattern of ivy that alternates on either side of the spline, an effect that's usually most visible when the plants grow horizontally. As you can see, we've provided some geometry, but you can easily use your own as long as it's set up in this way. Now let's look at how to use the macros. So select the RC Ivy Start object. The first thing to note is that the RailClone object is rotated to align to the wall that you wish to use for the ivy. This is important for two reasons. The macro will use this orientation to make sure that the leaves are facing away from the wall. It's also positioned so that it's at the bottom of the wall, because as we'll see, the macro has altitude parameters that are measured from the RailClone object's coordinates. So open the style editor and you'll see the two macros. We'll come back to this one, the branch maker, later. But let's start by importing the geometry. So create a segment node, immediately right click on it and choose Clone Multiple. Pick all of the leaves from one of the groups. I'll pick the ones with the lower suffix. Then create a new randomized node and wire the new segments to its inputs. Now we'll import the other group. Select one of the segment nodes and Clone Multiple. Pick the other type of leaves, these are the ones with the suffix upper. Wire the new segments to a second randomized node. Create a new sequence operator and wire the two randomized nodes to its inputs. This will create an alternating pattern of upper and lower leaves. Now wire this sequence node to the macro's leaves input. Add a new segment node and pick the stem geometry and just wire that to the stem input. And finally add a spline node and wire it to the macro's spline input. So it's as easy as that to set the macro up, and as I mentioned, you could use your own geometry from Quixel Megascans or any other vendor. Now we need a spline to determine the path for our ivy. To create one, I'm going to use Max's built-in freehand drawing tool. So I'll pick the freehand tool and disable auto grid and disable start new shape. The second one's really important because it will ensure that each new spline you draw is part of a single spline object. It basically saves you from having to collect them all manually later. We want to draw on this wall, so turn on constraints and pick the geometry from the scene. And that's it, now you can just draw your shape with the mouse. I rather like this step, you have a lot more control than letting an algorithm take care of it for you. Nonetheless, you should try and create realistic-ish patterns of branching stems. I'll speed this up a bit, but when you're done, right click to finish drawing and return to the RailClone object. And then assign the path to the spline node and you should have an ivy mesh. Now you've got your basic mesh, let's take a look at some of the controls you have to customize the ivy. First of all, you have a minimum and a maximum altitude range. These serve two functions. They act as a way of limiting the leaf growth to stop it growing all the way to the ground, and you can also set an upper limit. But the range is also used for the next two types of settings, which allow you to control the spacing and the scale at the start and the end of the altitude range. So for example, if you wanted larger leaves on the bottom of the wall, you can set the leaf scale at start to 100% and the scale at end to 40%. You can do a similar thing with spacing, reducing the spacing between the leaves as they get smaller so that the gaps between them aren't so large. Finally, there are a couple of checkboxes to control how the size and spacing interpolation behaves. With size and spacing by altitude, only the distance from the RailClone object's pivot is considered. This works well where you want leaves to change based on their height. It doesn't take into consideration the leaf's position on the spline, so as you can see with these horizontal splines, the leaves are more or less the same size along its length. Conversely, if I turn this off and enable size and spacing by spline position instead, then only the position on the spline is taken into consideration. This works well if you're drawing horizontal splines. It can look a bit odd if you have many sub-splines, because the scaling starts afresh with every new spline, so you potentially end up with large leaves starting in the middle of its parent branch. If you enable both of these, you'll get a kind of mix between them, which looks like it works pretty well in this case. That's it for the main macro. But there's also another macro called Ivy Branch Maker. Now this can be useful to create the effect you see when an ivy branch hangs down from a wall in tendrils instead of climbing. It works in conjunction with the existing macro. To illustrate, I'll draw some horizontal lines at the top of the wall. Now I'm going to assign the RailClone object to the new spline. Then I'm going to wire one of the randomized nodes to the Branch Maker macro's leaf input. It doesn't matter which one. Wire the stem segment to the stem input. And then select the macro and select Show Preview. A straight branch will be created at the RailClone object's pivot point so you can see what you're up to. As with the main macro, you have parameters to control the spacing and the size at the start and the end of the branch, as well as the overall length using the X size property. When you have a branch size and layout that you like, you can just wire the Branch Maker macro to the Ivy macro leaf's input. I'll turn off the altitude and spline position effects for this one, and here we have a kind of cascading effect of ivy tendrils. Be aware that there's some advanced nesting going on here, so it may be a little bit slower to build. Note that you can also use a spline for the branch's path, but you'll need to ensure that the first vertex is aligned to the RailClone object's pivot to ensure that the geometry aligns correctly. Another feature of the macro is the ability to add a clipping spline. I'll do this to remove the ivy from the text. It could be a window you need to remove or something similar. It's as simple as picking a spline and wiring it to the clipping input. And that really brings us to the end of this quick tips video. I hope you find it useful and convenient for Ivy modelling. As I've mentioned at the start, it won't necessarily replace procedurally growing plugins, but it might be enough for quick jobs or if you want more control than an automated solution can provide. Also, for larger areas, you could use these presets to create small patches that you then scatter with Forest Pack. Stay tuned and don't forget to subscribe for more videos coming soon.